Well, good morning. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time, one of your first times, I appreciate you stepping in. I know sometimes it's hard to come into a new place, so thank you for doing that. If you're joining us online, thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're with us. So the movie Untouchables tells the story of a group of police officers, and they were untouchable. Their integrity was such that were after people who were bootlegging alcohol during the Prohibition era. Kind of the leader of this group, at least in Chicago, was a guy named Al Capone. He was a New York gangster and businessman, and it's the story of the pursuit of Capone. And finally, officials got Al Capone later on income tax evasion, and he was jailed on that. But in this movie, there's a scene early on in which the leaders of Al Capone's gang, criminal outfit, whatever, are around a table, and apparently one guy has failed, and he walks around to this guy, and he's got a baseball bat, and he pursues literally to smash his head in. And he's sending a message. Don't fail, lest you get your brains beat in too. But you know what everybody around the table does? They look away. I mean, it's gross. They're literally beating the guy's brains out. All right, that's human nature. You know, the crucifixion of Jesus was every bit as horrific as that and infinitely more. And yet as Christians, we're not taught to blanch, to look away. We're taught to look right in to the crucifixion, to embrace the crucifixion. Why? Why would we do that? That's what we're going to talk about today. So if you got a Bible, if you'd open it to John 13, we'll start in verse 17 and go through verse 38. Wrestling with this question, why should Jesus' followers embrace the cross? Why should Jesus' followers embrace the cross? Last week we did the first half of John 13, and in it, Jesus washed the disciples' feet, and he left them a model of how to live. And he said to them in verse 17, you know, you're blessed if you do these things. You're blessed people. But then in verse 18, he qualifies that. He says, I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I've chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. He's talking about Judas, and he's quoting Psalm 41, verse 9, in which David is lamenting his status in life. He's sick, he's ill, but worst of all, an intimate, a close friend, one who with he used to dine, an act of intimacy, has turned against him. Jesus says, I know that feeling. That's Judas. Verse 19, Jesus looks towards his crucifixion. He says, from now on I'm telling you before it comes to pass, so that what does occur you may believe that I am he. I am he is that I am statement. I am the Son of God. I am he. I am who I am. The way God answered Moses when he asked who sent me. The eternal one, I've always been, I am, and I always will be. Jesus said, I'm God. And so I'm not a hapless victim in this crucifixion. I've seen it coming. It's part of God's eternal plan. And I don't want your faith to be thrown. So I'm telling you beforehand, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to end. Verse 20, Jesus then speaks till the time after he's resurrected from the dead and he ascends into heaven. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me. He's going to be sending the disciples out to continue his mission after he ascends back into heaven. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. Look, when the U.S. ambassador goes to, pick a country, Czechoslovakia, it doesn't go on its own authority. It goes in the authority of the United States. Jesus said, I'm not sending you out alone. You're going in my authority, in my name. Having said that, now, Jesus comes back to what is imminent, and that's his crucifixion, and that'll be started by a betrayal. Verse 21, when Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. Jesus knows what's coming. It's in the sovereign plan of God, and yet he is still troubled in spirit. Now, whenever I try and do an illustration of a spiritual thing, it always falls short, but I think the principle will hold. So before we moved here, we were in Arizona. I would, on my day off on Fridays, I was a substitute teacher. And it was not a computerized system like it is in Lincoln. it was a person, and so you would meet her, and she met me, and I was 39 years old when she met me, and she thought, you're going to be middle school. So 80% of the time, I substituted for a middle school class. And I usually knew by Monday or Tuesday what was going to happen on Friday, and I had done middle school enough to know this is going to be miserable. What are the middle schoolers? They're going to challenge your authority. Hey, I need you to stop talking when attendance. You keep talking. Okay, I'm going to need you to move over there. Oh, I don't want to move. Oh, I've got one of these yellow slips. Do I need to write one of these yellow slips to send you out of the IE? I know Tuesday what's coming on Friday, and I think about it. Well, it's just what Jesus is infinitely more. He knows what's coming in a day or two. I mean, the crowd will turn against him. They'll spit him. They'll beat him. They'll find him guilty. They'll nail him on a cross. And people will cheer while it's happening. That's troubling. Yeah, it's in the sovereign plan of God, but the human part of Jesus is troubled by that, rightfully so. So Jesus introduced the idea someone's going to betray him, and the disciples are stupefied. They're dumbfounded. They have no idea who it could be. Verse 22. The disciples began looking at one another, at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. So, verse 23 and 24, there was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved, and that's John. So he's leaning back on Jesus. So Simon Peter gestured to John, and said, hey, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. John, see if you can find out for us. So verse 25, he, that'd be John leaning back, thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? Verse 26, Jesus then answered, that it is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took it and gave it to Judas, the son of Iscariot. Look, dipping a morsel and offering to somebody is a sign of friendship and respect. Jesus knows what's coming, and yet he's given Judas one more chance to turn and to repent. Judas won't have it, because verse 27 says, after the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore, Jesus said to him, what you do quickly. Judas has lost control of his life. He's responsible for his decisions, but he's doing actions that don't make sense. They aren't reasonable. So I went to college a long time ago, and at that time there was network TV. We did have TV, but there was not cable TV. There were no video games. So nobody had a TV in the room. So I do a bachelor's and master's at college, and I go into a campus ministry. I'm at Colorado State, University of Northern Colorado, and for the first time I'm seeing students with video games. And I'm working with young men, and they get on a video game, and they get into it, and hey, like, dude, it's 10 to 6. The cafeteria closes at 6:15. I know, but I gotta. Hey. It's like it's 5 after 6, and the cafeteria. I know. I just said, hey, it's 6:35, and you missed dinner. Ah, man, I'm really hungry. I think I'll order a pizza. You're not making sense here. I mean, you paid for that meal. You could have hit. I know there's a pause button on those things. I know there's a pause button. You could have hit pause, go eat dinner, and come back and pick up your video game. But you've lost control. You've lost control. Well, that's a microcosm of what's going on with Judas. You make no sense here. You've seen Jesus to be the Son of God, and you think somehow betraying him, but you have lost control. So Jesus goes out. Judas goes out. Now, what Jesus said to John, he must have said quietly, because the rest of the disciples are confused. Where's Judas going? Verse 28 and 29. No one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he said this to him. For some were supposing, because Jesus had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need of for the feast, talking about the Passover feast. Or else that he should give something to the poor. Judas is going on some mission, either to buy some food or give money to the poor. You know, it's a religious festival. What's going on here? I'm not sure. So after receiving the morsel, Judas went out immediately, and it was night. Chronologically, that's true. It was night. But John doesn't put that there solely for chronological reasons. It's metaphorical reasons. It's night. It's dark. Friends, it's real dark. The Son of God is about to be crucified. Somebody has turned over his life to the point where he is going to lead a band of soldiers to arrest Jesus and have him beaten and whipped and crucified. It's really, really dark. But Jesus and God have a way of redeeming that which is really, really dark. That's what verse 31 and 32 talk about. Therefore, when he'd gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. Really, we're going to have a beating, a false, guilty verdict, a man nailed to a cross, and you're going to be glorified in it? If God is glorified in him, God will glorify him in himself and will glorify him immediately. Think about the soldiers in a foxhole. Enemy throws a grenade in. There's a number of soldiers there, and he just dives in the grenade. That speaks to the sacrificial nature of that soldier's character, doesn't it? Because he dove on it to save the life of, and we rightly honor that. Well, how much more with Jesus? He knew what he was walking into. He took the dive, if you will. But on top of that, the Father sent him to earth knowing this would happen. Imagine the parent signing off on his son or daughter going off to war knowing that they would die. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for my kid. I just couldn't. I got 2 sons. Knowingly signing off on that. But God the Father did. And God and Jesus are glorified. The Trinity are glorified in this horrific incident. Because it shows how committed they are to redeeming the relationship with us. So remember we talked about beating the guy with the bat, and we look away, and the cross is infinitely more brutal, and we're going to look right to it. Why? Why should we embrace the cross? Here's what I'd say. Jesus' crucifixion is the ultimate sign of his love for humanity. Jesus' crucifixion is the ultimate sign of his love for humanity. He stepped into a mess for you and for me, and did it knowingly and willingly. I need you to think back to 7th grade. Can you do that for me? Those of you, can you think back? Can you guys remember back to 7th grade? Did anybody like 7th grade? I didn't. All right, on this 7th grade day, I'm at the bike racks. I'm unlocking my bike when I get pounded in the back. And I turn around to face a guy significantly bigger than me. We had a little interaction. I didn't think it was that big a deal. He was mad, and he was ready to fight. Now, I want you to think back to 7th grade, to middle school. What happens? What do the other students do when there's a fight about to happen? They gather around, right? Let's go, fight, fight, fight. And they're looking for somebody to get beat up. Well, you know who's going to be beat up in this? Me. And I'm not feeling good about this at all. And then who do you think steps into that circle? God bless those teachers. Because there was a teacher who had bike rack duty. And, they recognized the circle. And this is a man, Mr. Woodhouse, teaches history. He goes, boys, is there a problem here? No, sir. Well, I think you better be going lest I haul you. I'm on my way, Mr. Woodhouse. You don't have to say any more. I was never so glad to have somebody step in the circle for me. You understand spiritually, it's you and me who are in that circle? You know who stepped in for you? Jesus. But here's where my illustration breaks down. Jesus just didn't get to disperse. Mr. Woodhouse had the authority to disperse the crowd. You guys be on your way, okay. Jesus didn't do that. He had the authority to do it. He chose not to do it. He stood in the circle and took the beating for you. That's what he did. That's why we ain't looking away from the cross. That's why we're embracing it. The story of a God who stepped into that circle and we're going to get beat to a pulpit and said, I'll take it for you, even though we deserve to be there. So Jesus says, verse 33, little children, I'm with you a little while longer. You will seek me. And as I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. Well, that's a little disconcerting if you've been following for Jesus 3 years. You give everything over, and I'm going someplace, and you can't come. Well, he's ascending to heaven, back to the Father. Now, you need to know this is part of a dialogue that we can't take it all in today, but in John 14, 1 and 2, verses 1 through 3, he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and I'm going to come back for you. In John 14, 18, he said, I'm not going to leave you as orphans, I'm going to come to you. John 14, 16, 26, he said, I'm going to send you a helper. In fact, it's better that I go away. I'm going to send you the Spirit. He's going to make me known. So that's not the full picture. But physically, after Jesus' resurrection, 40 days after, he ascends into heaven, and he's not going to be with them physically any longer. So he's going to begin to instruct them, to prepare them for their mission. Here's the first commandment. It said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. What's so new about that? I mean, Old Testament is talking about loving your neighbor. Well, here's what's different. Jesus said, I want you to love one another the way I've loved you. And he's about to demonstrate how that is. I'm going to lay down my life for you. Christians, I want you to love one another that way. So that means I'm giving my life for people? Yeah, it could be, but more likely it's going to be in matters of preferences or details, or I'm going to lay down my rights. I'm going to lay down what should be for you. First century. You know what the non-believers said about the Christians? Oh, how those Christians love one another. Oh, how those Christians love one another. I don't know about this resurrection stuff, but boy, they sure live different. Oh, how those Christians love one another. I'm wondering if the people who observe North Pointe Community Church, would they say that? Wow, man, those guys, they love one, they're committed to one another. They aren't people who hold on to grudges. They aren't people who hold on to grief. You didn't say hello to me. You did say, and you said something to him and her, and that means you don't like me and I. Why? Why would we let that go? Because there's something infinitely more important, and that's the credibility of the gospel. See, the gospel is centered on this guy who was perfect, laid down his life for us. And you've taken that in, I've taken that in. Why wouldn't we live that out? Why wouldn't we live that out? The credibility of the gospel is based on laying our lives down for one another, and I'm just not going to let things come between us. The credibility of the gospel is too important. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but this is an election year. Did you guys know that? Were you aware of that? It's an election year. And I'll bet you have an opinion on who ought to win that election. You think the very future of our nation depends on that candidate winning. Can I tell you something that's more important than that candidate winning? Infinitely more important? The credibility of the gospel. And I say that because you may be sitting in front of or beside or behind or somebody who's got a different idea politically than you do. And boy, they are wrong, and you're going to tell them, and it's... I'm not asking you to change whatever your political persuasion is, your opinion. But I'm saying do not let that become a thorn in a relationship with a brother or sister in Christ. Why? Because the credibility of the gospel is too important. Jesus said, man, I laid down, man, I got on the cross, man, I was innocent. I shouldn't have been there. I stepped in the circle when you should have been in the circle. You believe that? Is that what you took in? Well, why isn't that playing out in your life? The credibility of the gospel is at stake. One lays down his life. That transition at 36 to 38, Peter makes a promise he's going to lay down his life for Jesus. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot go. You cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can't I follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. There's the promise. I'll lay it down. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? That's a rhetorical question. Say, no, you won't. Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Peter, you're not going to lay down your life for me. I'm going to lay down my life for you. You know, the good news is, after Jesus resurrected from the dead, and we'll see it at the end of John 21, there was an intentional time of restoration where Jesus brought Peter back. He said, look, I need you to shepherd people. We're leaving that behind. And what's interesting is this Peter who will deny Jesus, after Jesus ascended and the Spirit is poured out and they begin to preach the gospel, Peter is front and center, and he gets threatened 2 or 3 times. He said, man, I can't stop speaking. What happened? He met the resurrected Christ. Ultimately, church history tells us that Peter dies sometime between 60 and 65 AD in Rome under Nero, crucified. The gospel is paramount. The gospel transforms people. The gospel brings life. Why do we look at it? Because when we do, it transforms us. It changes us from the inside out. When we internalize that this holy God stepped into the circle for us, well, that empowers us and changes us to live the way he did. It empowers us to live differently. You heard the phrase, win one for the Gipper? You heard that phrase, win one for the Gipper? Well, it comes from college football, wouldn't you know? Notre Dame. 1920, George Gipp was a famed player, and he got sick, and he passed away. Before he passed away, he talked to Coach Newt Rockne, and were these words, his exact words, but this is what Rockne would later report. Gipp said, sometime when the team is up against it and the breaks are beating the boys, tell them to go out there with all they've got and win just one for the Gipper. So that's 1920. Okay, let's roll the clock ahead 8 years. It's the end of the football season. Notre Dame is playing Army. It's not a really good season for Notre Dame. And Army's the superior team, and they're ahead 6-0 at half. And Rockne goes, what am I going to do to try and motivate these guys? So 8 years after the fact, he tells them the story of George Gipp. When they're up against it, blah, 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 tell them to go out and win one for the Gipper. Well, I mean, the story, legend has it that Notre Dame comes out there with tears in their eyes and they play above their heads and they storm back to win 12-6, beating a superior team. What motivated that change? A dead guy. A dead guy they didn't know. Hearing his story. Well, we're talking about a dead guy that we do know. And we know his story. We know he's perfect. And we know he stepped into the circle. If on a crazy football for half a game, a team can be motivated, how much more? The perfect Savior of the world stepping into the circle for us. Should that motivate us to live for Christ? The gospel, the credibility of the gospel is paramount. So we don't look away, we embrace the cross. Because it's Jesus' ultimate sign of his love for humanity. For me, and for you, and for those around you.